the conference, OneMedForum. We've got Andy Fish, president of OneMedDX, who's going to be hosting and moderating this panel on diagnostics and personalized medicine. So thank you again for attending, and enjoy the panel.
Great, thank you, Julia. So let's get started. Thank you for bearing with us. I know we're starting a few minutes late. We may go a few minutes later at the end just to make up for that. And we look forward to taking some questions at the end too, so we'll make sure to reserve a little time for that. As Julia said, I'm Andy Fish. I'm Executive Director of OneMedDX. OneMedDX is the trade association representing the world's leading manufacturers of diagnostics. Really happy to be here today with some great panelists. I appreciate the invitation from OneMedForum and putting this panel together. It's certainly timely. I'm sure all of you are aware of the degree to which personalized medicine is transforming healthcare. I think we're just at the cusp of seeing where that field is going to go. It's exactly what we're here to talk about today. I'd like to briefly introduce our panelists. Then we'll talk just a little bit about what personalized medicine is to set the stage, and then we'll really start getting into some of the nitty-gritty about where this business sector is headed and what the opportunities and challenges are. So I'd like to briefly just introduce, on my left here is Tom McLean, President and CEO of Vermilion. Tom has 20+ years of experience in executive management and corporate governance in public and private companies, particularly in diagnostics and biotechnology. He was formerly CEO and CFO of Clara Scientific, an early stage diagnostics company, and before that with Nabi, am I pronouncing that right? Biopharmaceuticals, and previously long-time experience at Bausch & Lomb. Next down is Adair Newhall, who's a principal with Domain Associates. He's been with Domain since 2009. Prior to Domain, Adair worked for two Domain portfolio companies, Esprit Pharma and ESP Pharma. And prior to working with those companies, Adair was an analyst with Thomas Weisel Partners. And down to my far left is Patrick Balthrop, who's president and CEO of Luminex. He's been in that position since 2004. Pat has over 30 years of experience in healthcare, biotech, and medical device industries. Prior to this position, he was president of Fisher Healthcare with Fisher Scientific International, and before that, spent about 20 years in medical devices and diagnostics, in the medical devices and diagnostics divisions at Abbott Laboratories. I'd also like to point out that Pat is a member of the board of OneMedDX, and Tom is the CEO of one of our member companies at OneMedDX. So I appreciate their participation in particular this morning. So I thought we'd get started just by doing a quick sort of set the stage for what exactly is personalized medicine. I'm sure all of you have a pretty strong understanding of what that field means, or at least means to you. But I'd like the panelists to comment a little bit on this before then I ask them to talk a little more about what their companies and their portfolio companies are doing in this area. I would offer up a very shorthand definition of personalized medicine as the use of molecular biomarkers to better manage and treat disease. I think you have to add to that, of course, the use of various therapies that have been developed in a personalized medicine context. So let me throw out a longer definition, though, that I think teases out more of the aspects of personalized medicine and start setting the stage for figuring out where are the business opportunities, what's going on in this area, and hopefully gives you a better appreciation for exactly why this is a transformative area of healthcare. I would offer a longer definition that would be something along these lines, that personalized medicine is the stratification of patient populations previously defined by broad disease categories into more narrow populations that are defined by specific disease mechanisms that are amenable to targeted interventions, and all of which is driven by the discovery and clinical validation or clinical identification of molecular level, meaning genomic or proteomic biomarkers, and the development and application of therapies targeted to those mechanisms. I realize that's a whole lot to throw at you, but I wanted to start there because I think that captures all the various aspects of personalized medicine. It's a complicated paradigm, if you will, but it's through that complicated paradigm that tremendous value is being derived for patients, and then, of course, given that, developing a continually growing market in personalized medicine. So I'm going to stop there and now throw it open to the panelists, because I'd like each of them to comment just generally on the definition that I just threw out there, talk a little bit about what personalized medicine means to you and what your company specifically is doing in this area, and we'll get started doing that. So Tom, you going to kick that off?
Sure, thanks Andy. When we think about personalized medicine at Vermilion, we certainly think about it in terms of the right therapy for the right patient, but we also think about it in terms of quality of care delivery. Our diagnostic actually is positioned at a critical decision point for a woman who is at risk for ovarian cancer. Statistics are shocking today. Mortality from ovarian cancer has not changed over the last 30 years. And there was a large registry study conducted in the state of California, published last year. It said 60% of women with ovarian cancer have that first surgery done by a gynecologist or a general surgeon. The problem with that is that surgery should be performed by a gynecologic oncologist. And if the gynecologic oncologist performs that surgery, there's an immediate 30% survival benefit. The tests, the procedures that are on the market today and are used commonly don't identify the women who are greatest risk for ovarian cancer. So a diagnostic like our OVA1 is a simple blood test, and on a 0 to 10 scale, it assesses risk for ovarian cancer. What that means is when a woman is beyond a certain pivot point, the gynecologic oncologist should be consulted in her care. So what we're doing is optimizing quality of care, promoting healthcare efficiencies, and importantly, affecting outcomes. So not a therapeutic decision, but a decision as to who is best suited to care for a woman with that ovarian mass.
Great. Hello, everyone. I'm going to tackle this from an investment side because it's not just one company that we deal with, but maybe multiple that are in the personalized medicine field. And we've actually abandoned the definition for personalized medicine and changed it to precision therapy. Because for us, that can entail biomarkers, it can entail algorithm packages, software, that all ultimately lead to a packaged product that will tailor for that particular patient. And when we look at sort of the investments that we've made over the last, say, a domain just recently made its 8th investment into diagnostics in the fund, our $500 million fund, Fund 8. And I have to say that we are often very cautious about investing in personalized medicine companies. And a large part is because there are so many definitions and there's so much competition that comes with some of these types of investments that we have to be very mindful about the consultants that we use to make the right decision. And so for me, I now will try to change the term to precision therapy, and I think we'll talk about that a little bit further, I guess, in the commentary a little later.
So I think the place to start is regarding the term personalized medicine, what it means. It's important to remember that if you ask a practicing physician, whether it's now, 10 years ago, 50 years ago, they've always felt like they've been delivering personalized medicine because physicians treat a patient by doing diagnostic testing, taking a patient history, et cetera, to try to make the right decisions based on those set of circumstances. So the way we think about it at our company is that the tools that we have or that we can provide need to be evaluated in the healthcare delivery context as a tool in the toolbox that can help a physician make a better decision, whether it's therapeutic or otherwise. And so what our company is doing is some of the obvious ones. We have a number of FDA-cleared devices that are used to test for the cytochrome P450 mechanisms that can determine whether someone's a fast or slow metabolizer of different types of compounds, et cetera. Those tests have been around for a long time, all the way up to and including working with large pharmaceutical companies to develop diagnostics on their behalf, because many pharmaceutical and biotech companies don't really know how to do that, consistent with their overall program. Because many pharmaceutical companies, I would say more so in the fairly recent past, have begun to take more and more action to try to use diagnostic methods as a way to guide, to stratify their patients or to get better outcomes in trials and ultimately when they market the product. The only other thing I would add is that I think the other thing that can throw people off a little bit is the use of the term molecular, because oftentimes when that word is used, people think of DNA. And of course, as you mentioned, Andy, during your opening remarks, proteomics are just as valuable in terms of guiding therapy. Actually, one of the programs we have is is with such was with Merck for one of their Alzheimer compounds, MK-8931, which is used as a BACE inhibitor, and they will use a product that we are designing and developing on their behalf to guide the therapeutic decision about who the best candidates are for that particular compound. So it's bigger than DNA, and it includes, I think, the concept of let's develop products that will drive better outcomes by putting more tools in the toolbox.
Great, thank you, Pat. Yeah, I think that's a very good thing to call out. At a little bit greater length is the distinction that all personalized medicine is not driven just by genetic testing. And certainly, I think we well understand proteins in the body are expressed by genes, and so a lot of what we're looking at is that secondary marker, which is the protein that's associated with a particular health condition, disease state, et cetera. So proteomics, the whole field of proteomics is equally key here. And really, I think more generally, the reason that personalized medicine has acquired this flavor, even though it's a broad term, the reason it's been associated with this advanced field is because it comes out of the evolution of science, where we can look at what's going on in the body at that molecular level, which is down to the obviously the level of very, very small biochemical entities in the body and the role they're playing with the disease. So as scientists advance the research that allows us to understand disease at that very specific level, then consequently can develop the diagnostic tests that evaluate an individual, can develop the pharmaceutical interventions, maybe other therapies, interventions that are necessary to address that disease. So I guess what I heard clearly coming out of that is, personalized medicine is a buzzword that, got picked up quite a long time ago. It's in wide play, and yet we often hear that same pushback of, well, isn't all medicine personal if you're performing it properly, right? So is this really the best term? And I think there clearly have been advanced other terms for this field that probably are more specific. Adair used the term precision therapy. Other people use stratified medicine. Other terms that really get more specifically at what this field offers. Nothing else has come into as common play as personalized medicine, but I do think that's important, again, just to set the stage, not to belabor the point, but that what we're talking about here is very specific, advanced, innovative tools for delving into what's going on with an individual and distinguishing that individual from a broader population. So I guess let's set that aside and let's talk a little more about just generally where this field is heading. Obviously, each of you are driving efforts to capitalize on various opportunities in this field, but could each of you speak a little more broadly to the longer term future of where this field is going? And do you think have we realized the promise of personalized medicine to date? Or again, the buzzword's been around for a long time, right? Is it here today? Are we just on the cusp of this? What's the market going to look like 5 to 10 years from now? Where do you see this field going? In terms of expansion and market development?
I certainly think about it as more being at very early stages. There are a lot of tools that are here today, but in terms of medical education programs, med schools that are focusing on educating in personalized medicine, we're at the start, and I think that's where it begins to get integrated into day-to-day medical practice. So as programs like the Hopkins program graduate and have physicians out in the community, I think then we'll start to see the real fundamental change from the value of personalized medicine. And I also think where it's headed is really improving quality of healthcare, whether that's in terms of prevention or treatment of a disease. I think we're just starting to wrestle with how do we assess quality, how do we measure and monitor quality, and these personalized medicine tools are going to be significant in contributing to that improvement in healthcare quality.
So I agree with Tom. I believe it's in the early stages, and I'm going to use 2 examples. One is what I saw at a Mayo conference here in September, and another is sort of where is the money going. And I'll start with Roche, which is the darling of the diagnostic industry. By 3 years from now, Roche will have 90% of its drugs matched with a companion diagnostic. And for a company as large as Roche to make that commitment and to try to find development pathways to get their drugs combined or to identify technologies that will match with their drug profiles, I think is a huge, huge commitment down the line. And I see, I just pulled this off the other day, but I've also seen Quest form relationships with both Illumina, LifeTech, and UCSF all to build a pipeline in essence and to find platform technologies, not just one single product, but platform technologies that can help churn out multiple products over a period of time. This is where the wave is going. I talk about sort of the experience that I had with Mayo. I found that a lot of their researchers and physicians, when we went to this, were all trying to figure out algorithms or biomarkers that they could handpick and help develop from their tech transfer office. And it was to the degree of tens to hundreds that were going on. You saw risk-taking that was a little bit more prevalent. And you also saw that there was a willingness, I think, to make cutting-edge technology to try to find what's best for the patients. So these are two things, these are two leading points for me that show that the money's going into these types of projects and that the physician community that's at cutting edge is willing to try to do some personalized medicine and advance new technologies in the space.
Derek, can I ask you to just elaborate quickly? We haven't really said specifically about companion
Sure.
pharmaceuticals and diagnostics. Could you just explain that term in that field briefly for the audience?
Sure. For me, companion diagnostics can be matching a diagnostic tool for a subpopulation, matching it with a pharmaceutical that is addressing a smaller patient population, but where you're showing outsized returns in early clinical data or preclinical data. So it's a combining of the diagnostic tool with the pharmaceutical in a very small population where there can be significant performance.
So I would agree, we're in the early innings of the development of personalized medicine as a concept. I think the thing that can be confusing is, Andy, in response to in your earlier comment, the term personalized medicine and this idea has been around for a long time. So if that's true, then how can we be in the early stages? And I think the answer to that is because a lot of the concepts that are around personalized medicine, companion diagnostics, and others, are specifically targeted at guiding therapeutic decisions. And a lot of the tools, you know, the Human Genome Project, which led to the the development of some additional technologies, some of which are in my company, but many other companies as well, is relatively recent in the context of the pharmaceutical development pipeline. Because if you think about, you know, the availability of those tools just, say, 10 years ago, it takes because of the nature of pharmaceutical development, and I want to emphasize I'm not a pharmaceutical person, so I don't want to pretend to be one. But in the context of pharmaceutical development, if you have a tool that emerges in, say, 2004, 2005, and you're already in phase 2, the likelihood that you're going to use a tool like that is less than if you're starting a whole development program in 2005 or 2006. And so if you believe that personalized medicine has a significant application in guiding therapy, then the reason why we're in the early innings, even though the principle has been around for a long time, is because the tools are relatively new and the rate at which they can be applied in a pharmaceutical development context are governed by the nature of how long it takes to develop some of those therapies. And so for all those reasons, I think if you look back at the diagnostics industry and you look at the categories that are growing the fastest, they are often what would be captured in this concept of personalized medicine, the pharmacogenomics markers, et cetera, and that's the reason why.
Great, excellent. So actually, let's take off on that point and ask each of you to talk a little more about the challenges of a product and development life cycle in both diagnostics and pharma that I think seems much longer than the pace of innovation in the basic science anyway. And for example, I think, you know, if you look at the literature, the number of new biomarkers coming forth regularly, frequently, for which at least there's some suggestion of clinical meaningfulness, far exceeds the pace at which you could take a given biomarker, develop a test, bring it through FDA approval, for example, or even commercialize it from the lab side, develop pharmaceutical product and so forth. So could you each talk a little bit about that challenge in this field in terms of the business cycles versus the kind of the scientific innovation side? How do you try to keep up with the pace of scientific innovation, bring that into, you know, commercialization as quickly as possible before you're overtaken by yet the next discovery that might trump your innovation? How do you think about meeting those challenges?
I think about innovation and the business model, it's a challenge. in a world where understanding of biomarkers and application of biomarkers is accelerating rapidly, but also where the application of those biomarkers can be very unique to a condition or a patient, it's not a process that's conducive to long development cycles, because by the time you get to the end of that cycle, there may be something that invalidates that or obsoletes that. So there is a challenge as to how you can effectively validate a target, demonstrate clinical utility, and get it out to patients where it can make a difference. And unlike a drug that gets put on the market and it has a life cycle and it has a use that's well defined, I think with these biomarker panels, there's always improvement, and the technology advances so rapidly that does become a challenge to a business model that requires funding and clinical evidence and data and more regulatory involvement as we go forward, uncertain coverage environment. That's a lot for a diagnostic company to have to manage.
Yeah, some great points, Tom. The observation from about 4 of our different companies, we have them engage on reimbursement about as quickly as they possibly can in the formation of the company now, whereas probably 5-7 years ago, that wasn't as much of an issue. You could do it about 2 years before launch of the product. And it's because of there's increased competition, but it's also because the codes have been changing very quickly. And as we all know, there have been some reimbursement challenges with some of the molecular diagnostic companies that are promoting products at the moment. If you don't have a cost savings theme with your narrative as you sell your product, I think in the hospitals especially, you will have a great challenge getting adoption from the physician base. And these are themes that we constantly look at Domain to understand and to pray that the adoption will continue to grow. I'd also say that the other thing that we're getting our companies to do more is sort of making the economic benefit case to the hospitals, probably at the first start or the first sales call or shortly thereafter. Because in order to get on the formulary discussions to get your new product adopted, you sure as heck better show in the long run how you're going to have not only a benefit to the patient, but a cost savings to the hospital.
So I think if the tools have been around for a long time and the data's in the literature that shows that some of these markers can be effective in guiding therapy, then why haven't some of those tools come to market sooner? And I would answer that question in 2 ways. First of all, the tools have to be evaluated in terms of their commercial viability based on the existing market dynamic. So in other words, if you have a way to do, say, a set of DNA markers, and the customer can do those today, and they can get them done on one shift, and they can spend $100 doing that, and then you walk in with another technology, say a sequencer, and it's going to cost them $5,000 in 3 days, they're probably not going to do it. Now, some of those technologies, they'll stick with what they have. Some of those technologies will certainly get there eventually, but I think the rate of adoption and the rate of advance there has been incredible regarding faster, better, cheaper for some of those emerging technologies. But there's still practical realities, particularly in this market, because of the reimbursement issues and everything else. There's a pricing cap, if you will, that's governed in the diagnostics market that doesn't really exist in the life science research market to the same degree, because those tests are performed based on this reimbursement mechanism, particularly in the United States and in other developed countries. So that's the first part. The second thing is, if you have a job like mine and your R&D team and your marketing team are putting together a program that basically says these are the markets we should be in, these are the products we should develop, then at some point, as a commercial entity, publicly traded company, we have to be thinking about return on investment. One of the things that Tom mentioned earlier, I think, is a critical issue, which is if you have some of those same tools that can facilitate the more rapid and more effective diagnosis of an infectious disease, I'm talking about these DNA-based testing tools, And you can restate the market in terms of, you know, converting customers from culture or other types of methods that are very time consuming to something that's more sensitive and faster. Then you can evaluate the return on investment based on the number of cases that are available in the public domain for that particular infectious disease. On the other hand, some of these other therapy guiding biomarkers, which are not very well understood by the medical community, the whole issue of physician education, and that will determine who's going to order the test. If you're sitting in that R&D review trying to figure out what to fund, one of the questions you're going to ask is, how many tests are performed? And how many were performed last year? And what's the reimbursement for them and all that stuff? And the answer is, we think it's going to be there. We think the market's going to be there. We think the reimbursement's going to be healthy, but there's some uncertainty there. And so for companies like mine, we do both, right? We develop some of these things that are of higher risk, but it certainly has an effect regarding how much investment occurs because of the lack of physician education and the uncertainty around how they're going to be reimbursed once you market them.
Great points. So I think let's delve into reimbursement and that challenge, because I think it's probably one of the biggest, in a sense, probably one of the biggest clouds over this industry generally. A lot of uncertainty. Before we get into more of that detail, though, I'd like to ask each of you to comment just a little bit on what is the array or the kind of the mix of your direct customers versus the other entities that influence your marketplace. For example, if you're selling to a laboratory, your laboratory director presumably is making a decision on whether or not to, you know, utilize your test, purchase equipment, and so forth. But there are others that are thinking about the economics that are going on in the laboratory. The hospital system in which that lab, you know, is situated, for example, is that CEO and that health system thinking about, you know, laboratory test utilization and driving some of that decision making? What is going on with the private payer? How is the private payer thinking about test utilization? How is that influencing the way a laboratory director, you know, in some way thinks about what is on the test menu? And of course, we've got the government payer as well, CMS in particular, obviously, for the Medicare population. So before we get into some of the nitty-gritty around the reimbursement challenges, can you give a bigger sense, kind of a broader sense of who your customer is or your multiple customers, and are there others that are influencing your marketplace who aren't your direct customers?
With a test like the one that we brought to market, OVA1, it's part of a care path. So the customers that we have to work with are over an extended care paradigm. We have to deal with the concerns of a generalist and a gynecologist. We need to balance that with the gynecologic oncologist who wants to be at the center of care for the patient. We are dealing with large private managed care organizations. We're dealing with NCCN cancer care centers. We're dealing in community models, which are a particular challenge for women at risk for ovarian cancer, and urban models where that care is highly integrated. So the audiences that we have to deal with are very diverse, and that creates an incredible complexity to coverage decisions. And the way that we address that is in developing accepted care paths. So working at all points along that continuum of care, how does this test fit in? What value does it deliver? And certainly, as Blair observed in the past, outcome improvement was good enough. And today, that model needs to include economic benefit, cost savings to the system. But increasingly, as we deal with these private providers and NCCN centers, an even more important concept that's evolving is the idea of healthcare efficiency. Is the optimal treatment team involved at the right point in care, and how does that affect the ultimate course for the patient? So very, very complex all along the way.
I'm going to pass this off to Pat, but the only observation that I've seen in our due diligence is the emergence of minute clinics, and I'd love to talk about that in a second, but you're more, this is more.
No, I think the answer is it's a very complex distribution channel. You know, everything from the person who's actually going to be running the device on the lab bench to that person's management structure, including the laboratory director, as you mentioned, Andy, the management of the hospital, because there's always a financial decision that has to be made regarding adopting a new method, the purchasing department as part of that, and then outside the traditional, how do you sell a product to a customer? You have to think about the regulatory agencies, including FDA, of course, the reimbursement authorities, not just CMS, but also private payers. I think just to be clear, that may sound complex, but it's not different. I mean, I've been doing this for 30 years. It was the same thing 30 years ago. What's new and different now, I think, is relatively recently, I should say, is the focus on the higher value, also higher priced, from a reimbursement perspective, diagnostic methods, some of which are through the CLIA lab model, like Tom's company and others, but also within the traditional or the more traditional model of companies like mine selling devices to laboratories to be performed, and then those laboratories being reimbursed for the tests as they perform them. And so what's relatively recent is the focus on the reimbursement authority, CMS in particular, on some of those higher valued, higher priced diagnostic methods. So we have to deal with all of them, the physician included, so that we can understand how many tests are going to be will ultimately be ordered. But that's not really new and different. What's new and different is really this relatively recent phenomenon regarding the focus on the reimbursement levels for some of these high-value products.
Right. So let's drill right down into that, because I think, there's very specific questions around how this affects your business planning, how it affects financing, investing, whether it's an early stage company. I mean, everybody's seen these challenges of trying to figure out, and Adair, you said it, sort of make your reimbursement planning part of your early stage planning, right? And I think we're certainly seeing that from the trade association perspective across this whole field, is the absolute imperative of thinking about your reimbursement model. Essentially, what is your market in the early stages of product R&D? And I've heard more and more folks from companies that are thinking a lot about this is, one of your clear gateways on the R&D side needs to be reimbursement, right? So the extent to which this essentially a policy area, especially if you think about Medicare reimbursement, has now, I think, almost become front and center in terms of business planning. I'd like each of you to comment a little more about that. Tom, I'll go to you, because you said at the very beginning, you talked about the value proposition for your product, which is bringing the gynecological oncologist into that equation, and the improvement in outcomes that clearly can be realized when your test drives that intervention of the right specialist. But how do you value that improvement in outcome from a dollar standpoint? Who pays for that, and who's willing to pay more because you're driving a better outcome?
Wow, yeah, that is the business challenge.
Let's get right to the heart of all this, right?
Did a great job of summarizing that. Clearly, as you stated, there is a demonstrable outcome benefit when the gynecologic oncologist performs that surgery, removing an ovarian mass that's malignant. Who is influential in understanding that? Certainly that does come down to the provider and the healthcare system. The consequences of a bad decision there are a second surgery that follows very quickly. You're unable to stage the disease. It means chemotherapy for a woman who had that surgery done by a generalist is deferred for 6, sometimes up to 8 weeks. The disease is often upstaged when a generalist performs that first surgery on the ovarian mass, and unfortunately it turns out to be malignant. So there's a cascade of significantly adverse events for a woman when the wrong doctor performs that first surgery. There are a lot of challenges to that, some that you would expect, some that you wouldn't. There are challenges that a gynecologist and the economics of their practice and the numbers of surgeries they perform versus referring on to a gynecologic oncologist. It's amazing, but in this day and age, women who are in rural areas, are uneducated, are not Caucasian, don't have the same access to care. So when we think about coverage decisions and who values the test, we're addressing issues that I never would have anticipated with a specialty pharmaceutical product, because it's fundamentally affecting those day-to-day care decisions. And to communicate that value proposition, to model that, that's very challenging. So what we have gone to do now is work with healthcare providers like Kaiser. And the way that we are starting our work in this area is first defining quality of care metrics. And for the first time for ovarian cancer, what defines quality of care? What drives that? And then to do the analysis of how a test like OVA1 fits into that quality of care proposition. And so then that gives us an integrated model where we can talk about outcomes, economics, and healthcare efficiency. And I really like that model. I think that's going to prove value, and we want to make that more core to our company's DNA as we go forward and start to think about coverage and reimbursement decision. It's a more integrated model approach, and it pulls together all of the benefits of the test.
So Tom, I just want to ask you to quickly follow up on that. So you're talking about obviously an expensive investment in demonstrating clinical utility. In other words, the health economic value of your intervention.
Right.
So it's an expensive investment, it's presumably time consuming. Plus you've got hurdles on the, at least on the Medicare side, of time to getting a coverage decision, multiple decision makers potentially. At the end of the day, what's your return on that investment? That obviously is significant and growing in these areas, as Pat called out earlier.
Well, yes, we feel like a lot of diagnostic companies that we're under siege right now, that we have a tool that dramatically changes the course of care for a woman with ovarian cancer. And yet we face challenges, and Andy's very familiar with this, with agencies like CMS who look at a test, so it's a combination of 5 protein biomarkers and an algorithm that can get a result from those biomarkers that aren't obvious from the biomarkers themselves, and help the physician make a critical treatment decision. Sitting down with agencies like CMS, we went through all of last 2012 and then again through most of 2013, where CMS was looking only at the biomarkers and not willing to consider the value of what the algorithm did to create a result that assessed risk on a scale that helped physicians. It's a very intensive process. The type of data that is going to be required to facilitate those decisions and avoid a 2-year cycle to get through that consideration process in the future, I think you need to think about that, as you said, early on, be proactive, design the studies, and deliver the results. And by moving that through the cycle faster, it's going to deliver a return on investment.
All right, thank you. So Adair, I want to come to you next, but I guess first of all, just a kind of a stage-setting comment around what's going on in reimbursement. Tom was just alluding to, or specifically addressing CMS in terms of Medicare reimbursement. What we see in the Medicare reimbursement environment is a reimbursement system that was established in the mid-1980s and fundamentally hasn't really changed. It still looks at the same limited set of criteria around valuing and paying for a test, which means the resources it takes to develop and produce that or run that test rather within a laboratory context. It doesn't really look at both the sort of pre-test performance investment that might be made by a company like Tom's or Pat's, and it doesn't look at the downstream impact of the use of that test, as Tom was just talking about. So the Medicare system is not set up at all to look at the kind of value points that this industry is currently delivering, and that's a policy challenge. But the broader challenge as well is that there's not as much sophistication or experience on the private payer side as well for evaluating diagnostics and really thinking about how a private payer maybe even should be proactively thinking about driving utilization of diagnostics for better outcomes. That's changing, but I certainly would say it's not a mature and sophisticated field yet. There's been a lot more experience on the private payer side in thinking about the value of pharmaceuticals. There's also a lot more money in pharmaceuticals, which helps drive the kinds of investment Tom was just talking about to develop a clinical utility or health economic case for your product. So I just want to very quickly, because we could go all morning talking about this, just set that stage a little bit to explain that this is a broadly challenging environment in terms of getting a reimbursement whether it's from CMS or a private payer, that's commensurate with the kind of investment it takes to bring these products to market. So Adair, let me come back to you. You talked earlier about looking at, I think, investment opportunities where there's, a value case, or at least, looking to see that there's an investment in making that value case early on. Mm-hmm. So what are the things you look at as an investor in looking at investment prospects, or once you've made an investment, how do you drive your portfolio companies to tackle this challenge?
Yeah, so you deal with very intelligent CEOs, and sometimes overly ambitious. And so now we've watched 8 different companies now that are within different various stages of commercial success. And a lot of the time, if I see a business plan that says we're going to engage most of Europe nowadays, we're going to start in Europe first, and then we're going to come to the United States once we get approval. It gives me a moment of pause, and the reason for that is all the reimbursement systems throughout Europe are very different. And what I like to see is more of a targeted approach, or what we advise some of our companies is a more targeted approach. Find a reimbursement system that you think there are codes that are in place, that the process is well understood, and choose 1 or 2 countries in Europe. And then when you feel like you've advanced the US project, take those learnings that you've done in Europe and hopefully do a better job in the United States with a more refined message. And so one thing is just the sales strategy and how ambitious that is. Another is, we talked about the codes recently, and there used to be an approach where our companies would stack codes to get a premium price. Nowadays, you're seeing that has sort of been turned upside down. We get very skittish about new companies coming in that have stack code type of strategies. So we're advising a lot of our companies not to pursue that type of approach. I'm finding also in the US setting the engagement of stakeholders. And initially you think that the physician is the one who makes the decision, and that will ultimately drive sales if you can get the right key opinion leaders behind you. I see more and more of the case now that we have to engage the lab specialists, the budgetary, the finance CFO within the hospital setting, and make sure they're being handheld along the way and not neglected, because on 1 or 2 occasions I've seen them come and prevent us selling product within the hospital system. Mm-hmm. So these are just some, having the purview of 8 different companies trying to sell product at the moment, this is sort of common themes that we see.
So just to reiterate an earlier point, when we're evaluating reimbursement for in the United States, and the United States is extremely important, just because the total commercial prospect for a product that is not able to be sold in the United States is dramatically different than one that can be. By the way, I agree with Adair's comment about, you mean Europe isn't all one country? And so we actually take the identical approach inside our company, picking 2 or 3 countries in Europe to try to establish the right momentum for the product and be very thoughtful about that. But in the United States, the role of CMS is extremely important, obviously. But if you ask CMS, we have a product, diagnostic or otherwise, and it will improve outcomes. It's going to be costly to develop and get cleared. Will you consider healthcare economics or total cost savings when you establish your reimbursement level? Answer: no. Unequivocal no. Why? They point to the statute and other things, and again, I don't think it's because they don't realize it's important. They just have the restrictions that they have statutorily, which creates a policy problem that AdvaMed DX and others are working hard to address. But there's also a significant opportunity outside CMS, outside Medicare in the United States, and that's in the world of private payers. And so as a company, we engage to varying degrees depending on the situation with the private payers, realizing that to try to make sure that, because making sure that we tell the message about healthcare economics to that population, for the people that are covered by, the populations covered by the private payers, because they do care about about healthcare economics because they're often commercial entities trying to make a profit. The nuance there, or the challenge, is often that what the private payers are trying to achieve is often diametrically opposed to what our customers are trying to achieve. In other words, if you introduce a product to a private payer and try to convince them that they should reimburse it at a healthy rate for whatever reason, what they're trying to achieve, they will be much more likely to do that if the result is the patient doesn't enter the hospital. If the testing, if the diagnostic test that you're trying to sell is run by hospital laboratories, the customer wants the patient in the hospital, the payer doesn't. And so that's a little bit of a delicate dance that you have to do. But many of these tests can be performed in a way where there's a significant economic benefit to be done if the test is done to prevent a patient from the hospital, but the same test can be done on inpatients to deliver real benefit as well. And so as a company, we try to focus on those types of intersections where we can save money for the healthcare for the insuring entity, but also deliver better outcomes at a lower cost for the customer that's actually doing the test as well.
Well said. So unfortunately, we're coming fairly close to the end of our time, which is hard to believe because I feel like we've just set the stage for another 2 hours of conversation. And I think we could continue the conversation for a few minutes, but I wanted to see if there's questions in the audience over here. And I think, wait, Julie, can we bring a mic up maybe? Just to make sure we...
Yep.
Okay, great, thanks. There's up here, there's a question.
Hi, a very informative presentation. Thank you very much. I just came from hearing Esther Dyson speak on promoting health and in the way that products do that. So you're talking about diagnostics, which fit into her thinking quite clearly. And having had the experience of taking a drug from bench to market personally, I can feel for you, although I haven't taken a diagnostic. But I do remember Dan Levangie talking about the thin prep pap smear story, and I feel for you big time. So my question is twofold. One is, what are we going to do about the rural population that is farm country, which is a big part? It's Monterey, which includes Carmel, and Santa Cruz County in California, and gosh knows where else in the United States. But it's a big deal. And the second thing is you know, that there's an enlightenment process that needs to go on here. And what I don't feel is the groundswell from the women and the women's organizations. And so perhaps you're creating that groundswell. But I think that is something that those of us that really do care about women's issues are right with you. And you know, all gentlemen up there, but you know, we in the audience are ready to go.
Excellent. Well, I think in that issue of healthcare equality, and particularly where you were talking about urban and rural centers, that's why I'm in diagnostics, and that's why I feel so passionately about diagnostics. Because if they can be accessible and they can help to inform optimal treatment decisions, then a physician in a rural setting understands what can be gained by asking that woman to travel to a major metropolitan center to see a specialist like a gynecologic oncologist. I think diagnostics can be affordable, they can be highly informative, and they can lead to dramatic improvements in quality of care and make opportunities for care more accessible and understandable for women. And on the women's health issues, I think in the diagnostics area, it's been slow for the groups who support those initiatives to understand how critical diagnostics are. But I am very excited that in 2014, organizations like the Society for Women's Health Research, that that has been so instrumental in making sure that therapeutic research programs are focused on women's health needs. They've made 2014 the year of diagnostics, and they are going to be focused on building awareness at Capitol Hill among healthcare providers and researchers. It will be a theme of their X conferences on where women's health research needs to go. I think their work, and they're integrating a lot of the women's health advocacy organizations, that there'll be a huge push there. So anyone in the audience who is interested in being supportive of that, please get informed about those initiatives, and if you can, join them, because I think 2014 can be a game changer.
I'd just add, I think they can be incredibly effective. You know, my company happens to have a product that's used to detect the genetic mutations associated with the inherited disease cystic fibrosis. And so we've been very active with the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation and others, and it can be very, very powerful and very effective. So, you know, just to kind of echo what Tom says, I think those community activity organizations, particularly around a specific disease state or whatever, can be extremely powerful, and addressing some of the problems about the detection and effective treatment of ovarian cancer. You know, companies can tell the story, but citizens that can get in front of the policymakers have a lot louder voice. Right.
You do. Absolutely.
Julia, do we have time for another question?
Yeah.
Hi, I just wanted to follow up quickly on a comment you made, Adair, about minute clinics. You didn't get a chance to elaborate on that. What my question is, quite simply, is do you see an intersection between these evolving technologies and these more point-of-care settings? And if so, what do you think it looks like?
I'm really thankful you asked that question. I was just about to jump in because it's related to her question as well. I am starting to see within the electrosensor realm technologies that can bring rapid tests that are cutting-edge technologies that are very well positioned for the minute clinics that are a part of the Obamacare rollout. So the Walgreens and the CVS's of the world are now going to be in time over the next 5 to 10 years, I believe, where you get your strep culture or your blood testing or anything where we can take the burden from the hospitals and bring them now into the rural setting or into a minute clinic setting. And I think the technology is just about there. One company, it's not a pitch for a company we just made an investment in, but there's one in particular that is a POC platform for STDs and infectious diseases. And I think within those realms, especially for women population, is a great starting point because you do need rapid results. You do need to have the patient either remain in the clinic, especially in sort of urban settings. If they walk away, then you might not get them treated at all. And I just now, for the first time in the last 6 months, we did a white paper domain, and I think there's a groundswell that there's going to be more POC technologies that are coming out.
Great.
One more.
Delivering healthcare at the lowest cost point. Here's hoping, right?
So there's been a lot of talk about the U.S. market and reimbursements, etc. What about emerging economies? I mean, 30% of the emerging economies, people can afford to pay themselves. Forget having reimbursement. They have funds to pay it by themselves. You go into places like China and India, 30% of the people can afford to pay out of pocket, not requiring the government or others to pay. What do you think of that market?
No, I agree. I mean, I think the one thing I would add, though, is that I spent 4 years of my life living in Asia, serving markets like China and India. And the one mistake I think a lot of people make is that, you know, India is not one market. China is not one market either. And that's changing even more rapidly. And so there are significant opportunities there. But I think the technology advances that we have to continue to make to ensure that we can deliver reliable, accurate, precise results we still have some work to do there, because those markets can be, the price points are not often the same as may exist in other parts of the world, And frankly, the infrastructure required to be able to do service and support and get products from one place to another in those countries can be dramatically different than elsewhere. So reliability and things like storage conditions and all those kinds of things have to be considered. But with all that said, I think that the opportunities there are tremendous, and my company happens to be making a lot of investments in products and technologies and putting infrastructure in place in that part of the world for those reasons.
For an innovative diagnostic company like Vermilion, the biomarkers we have aren't biomarkers ordinarily associated with ovarian cancer. So the value of what we do is actually in the algorithm itself and how these disparate markers can be interpreted. So as we start to think about opportunities in India and China, a very large concern for us are intellectual property rights. How do we protect that know-how and make sure that that isn't compromised in the effort to bring those tests into those markets? And I think as a country like China solidifies itself in terms of protecting IP rights, then it will become a much more viable opportunity for us in the future.
Well, I'm afraid just due to time, we'll have to cut it off there. I want to thank our panelists for providing a lot of insight today. I think, as I think you've probably gathered, we could sit here for a lot longer and talk about all these issues, but I think what we've heard today is an encapsulation of an area of medicine, an area of healthcare in which technological innovation and scientific discovery are both proceeding at a tremendous pace, where there is the current transformation of healthcare and the potential to dramatically transform healthcare in the future. That this will be a growing field. Obviously, there are projections that this is an area of healthcare that will continue to grow significantly. And yet we've also heard that you have a need to speak to, communicate with, and communicate value to a wide set of diverse audiences. So there clearly are challenges in continuing to bring new products to the market. And yet I think that ultimately the size of this market and this expanding market will continue to drive a lot of innovation and investment in this sector. So I want to thank our panelists again for being with us, and maybe they'll be around for a few questions. So thank you very much.